Hi everyone. I hope that you've gotten outside over the past 2 days to enjoy some of this great weather that we're having here in Eastern Pennsylvania, because at least it's not raining. We left off the last time I was reading this wonderful novel with you called Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. We left off with Winnie, our main character, deciding to venture out into the wood next to the home that she lives in with her grandmother and her, I'm assuming, mother and father. The day before this happened, she'd had a visitor of a strange man in a yellow suit, and as they stood there talking, they heard a slight twinkling of sounds coming from the wood, sounds that are familiar or sound like a little music box, perhaps a jewelry box, something that winds up. Winnie went to bed that night. She's a little apprehensive about perhaps running away because that was her original plan, but does decide in the morning to get up and go on a mini adventure. So she adventures into the wood, and to her surprise, she sees a boy sitting leaning up against a very large tree, looking very relaxed, no shoes on, kind of worn, tattered clothes, and that's where we're going to pick it up today. Then he rubbed an ear carelessly. Oh, by the way, I'm on page 26. Yawned and stretched. Shifting his position, he turned his attention to a little pile of pebbles next to him. As Winnie watched, scarcely breathing, he moved the pile carefully to one side, pebble by pebble. Beneath the pile, the ground was shiny wet. The boy lifted a final stone, and Winnie saw a low spurt of water arching up and returning like a fountain into the ground. He bent and put his lips to the spurt, drinking noiselessly, and then he sat up again and drew his shirt sleeve across his mouth. As he did this, he turned his face in her direction, and their eyes met. For a long moment, they looked at each other in silence, the boy with his arms still raised to his mouth. Neither of them moved. At last, his arm fell to his side. "You may as well come out," he said with a frown. Winnie stood up embarrassed, and because of that, resentful. "I didn't mean to watch you," she protested as she stepped into the clearing. "I didn't know anyone would be here." The boy eyed her as she came forward. "What are you doing here?" he said to her sternly. "It's my wood," said Winnie, surprised by the question. "I can come here whenever I want to, at least. I was never here before, but I could have come here any time." "Oh," said the boy, relaxing a little. "You're one of the Fosters, then." "I'm Winnie," she said. "Who are you?" "I'm Jess Tuck," he answered. "How do?" And he put out a hand. Winnie took his hand, staring at him. He was even more beautiful up close. "Do you live nearby?" she managed at last, letting go of his hand reluctantly. "I never saw you before. Do you come here a lot?" "No one's supposed to. It's our wood." Then she added quickly, "It's all right, though, if you come here. I mean, it's all right with me." The boy grinned. "No, I don't live nearby, and no, I don't come here often, just passing through, and thanks. I'm glad it's all right with you." "That's good," said Winnie irrelevantly. She stepped back and sat down primly on a short distance from him. "How old are you anyway?" she asked, squinting at him. There was a pause. "Why do you want to know?" "I just wondered," said Winnie. "All right, I'm 104 years old," he told her solemnly. "No, I mean really," she persisted. "Well then," he said, "if you must know, I'm 17. 17? That's right." "Oh," said Winnie hopelessly. 17, that's old." "You have no idea," he agreed with a nod. Winnie had the feeling he was laughing at her, but decided it was a nice kind of laughing. "Are you married?" she asked next. This definitely tells me this is back in history, because 17-year-olds don't get married today. This time he laughed out loud. "No, I'm not married. Are you?" Now it was Winnie's turn to laugh. "Of course not," she said. "I'm only 10, but I'll be 11 pretty soon." "And then you'll get married?" he suggested. Winnie laughed again, her head on one side, admiring him, and then she pointed to the spurt of water. "Is that good to drink?" she asked. "I'm thirsty." Jess Tuck's face, actually I think his name is Jesse Tuck's face was instantly serious. "Oh, that? No, it's not," he said quickly. "You mustn't drink from it. Comes right out of the ground, probably pretty dirty." and he began to pile the pebbles over it again. But you drank some, Winnie reminded him. Oh, did you see that? He looked at her anxiously. Well, me, I'll drink anything. I mean, I'm used to it. It wouldn't be good for you, though. Why not? Said Winnie. She stood up. It's mine anyway. It's my wood, and I want some, and I'm about as dry as dust. And she went to where he sat and knelt down beside the pile of pebbles. Believe me, Winnie Foster, said Jessie, it would be terrible for you, and if you drank any of this water, just terrible, I can't let you. Well, I still don't see why not, said Winnie plaintively. I'm getting thirstier every minute. If it didn't hurt you, it won't hurt me. If my papa was here, he'd let me have some. You're not going to tell him about it, are you? Said Jessie. His face had gotten very pale under the sunburn. How does a face get pale under sunburn? That's an interesting comparison by the author. He stood up and put a bare foot firmly on the pile of pebbles. I knew this would happen sooner or later. Now, what am I going to do? As he said this, there was a crashing sound among the trees, and a voice called, Jessie! Thank goodness, said Jessie, blowing out his cheeks in relief. Here comes Ma and Miles. They'll know what to do. And quite sure enough, a big, comfortable-looking woman appeared, leading a fat old horse, and at her side was a young man, almost as beautiful as Jessie. It was Maytuck and her other son, Jessie's older brother. And at once, when she saw the two of them, Jessie with his foot on the pile of pebbles and Winnie on her knees beside him, she seemed to understand. Her hand flew to her bosom, grasping at the old brooch that fastened her shawl, and her face went bleak. Well, boys, she said, here it is. The worst is happening at last. What does she mean? What is the worst that is happening at last? Let's read on. Chapter 6. Afterward, when she thought about it, it seemed to Winnie that the next few minutes were only a blur. First, she was kneeling on the ground, insisting on a drink from the spring, and the next thing she knew, she was seized and swung through the air, open-mouthed, and found herself straddling the bouncing back of the old fat horse, with Miles and Jessie trotting alongside either side, while May ran puffing ahead, dragging on the bridle. Winnie had often been haunted by visions of what it would be like to be kidnapped. But none of her visions had been like this, with her kidnappers just as alarmed as she was herself. She had always pictured a troop of burly men with long black mustaches who would tumble her into a blanket and bear her off like a sack of potatoes while she pleaded for mercy. But instead, it was they, Maytuck and Miles and Jessie, who were pleading, Please, child, dear, dear child, don't you be scared. This was May trying to run and call back over her shoulder at the same time. We wouldn't harm you for the world. If you'd yelled or anything, that was Jessie, someone might have heard you, and that's too risky. And Miles said, We'll explain it soon as we're far enough away. Winnie herself was speechless. She clung to the saddle and gave herself up to the astonishing fact that though her heart was pounding and her backbone felt like a pipe full of cold running water, her head was fiercely calm. Disconnected thoughts presented themselves one by one, as if they had been waiting their turn in line. So this is what it's like to ride a horse? I was going to run away today anyway. What will they say when I'm not there for breakfast? I wish the toad could see me now. That woman is worried about me. Miles is taller than Jessie. I'd better duck if I don't want this next branch to knock me off. They had come to the edge of the wood now, with no sign of slowing their rapid jog. The road, where it angled across the meadow, was just ahead, dazzling white in the open sunlight. And there, standing on the road, was the man from the night before, the man in the yellow suit, his black hat on his head. All right, first of all, why did they grab her? Why wouldn't they let her drink from the little natural spring? And what is this man doing there? These are all the questions that are going through my head. What are you questioning? Discovering him, seeing his surprise, and presented at once with choices, Winnie's mind perversely went blank. Instead of crying out for help, she merely goggled at him as they fled past the spot where he stood. Maytuck was the only one who spoke, and the most she could offer was teaching our little girl how to ride. Only then did it come to Winnie that she ought to shout, waving her arms, or do something. But the man had fallen away behind at that time, and she was afraid to let go of the saddle, afraid to turn around lest she fall off the horse. In another moment it was too late. They had sped up the hill and down the other side, and the opportunity was lost. After another few minutes, the road led them to a place where, off to the left, a shallow stream looped near, with willows and sheltering scrubby bushes. "Stop!" cried May. "We'll stop here." Miles and Jessie grabbed at the horse's harness, and he pulled up abruptly, nearly toppling Winnie off over his neck. "Lift the poor child down," May gasped, her chest heaving. "We'll go catch our breath by the water and try to put things straight before we go on." But the explanation, once they had stumbled to the banks of the stream, came hard. May seemed embarrassed, and Miles and Jessie fidgeted, glancing at their mother uneasily. No one knew how to begin. For her part, Winnie, now that the running was over, began to comprehend what was happening. And with the comprehension, her throat closed and her mouth went dry as paper. There was no vision. This was real. Strangers were taking her away. They might do anything. She might never see her mother again. And then, thinking of her mother, she saw herself as small, weak, and helpless. And she began to cry, suddenly, crushed as much by outrage as shock. May Tuck's round face wrinkled in dismay. "Dear Lord, don't cry. Please don't cry, child," she implored. "We're not bad people. Truly, we're not. We had to bring you away. You'll see why in a minute, and we'll take you back just as soon as we can. Tomorrow, I promise." When May said tomorrow, Winnie's sobs turned to wails. Tomorrow? It was like being told she would be kept away forever. She wanted to go home now, at once, rush back to the safety of the fence and her mother's voice from the window. May reached out to her, but she twisted away, her hands over her face, and gave herself to weeping. "This is awful," said Jessie. "Can you do something, Ma? The poor little tad." "We ought to have some better plan than this," said Miles. "That's the truth," said May helplessly. "The dear Lord knows there's been time enough to think of one, and it had to happen sooner or later. We've been plain bone lucky it hasn't happened before now, but I never expected it to be a child." She reached distractedly into the pocket of her skirt and took out the music box, and without thinking, twisted the winding key with trembling fingers. When the tinkling little melody began, Winnie's sobbing slowed. She stood by the stream, her hands still over her face, and listened. Yes, it was the same music she had heard the night before. Somehow it calmed her. It was like a ribbon tying her to familiar things. She thought, when I get home, I'll tell Granny it wasn't elf music after all. She wiped her face as well as she could with her wet hands and turned to May. "That's the music I heard last night," she managed between recovering sniffles. "When I was out in my yard, my granny said it was elves." "Dear me, no," said May, peering at her hopefully. "It's only my music box. I didn't suppose anyone could hear it." She held it out to Winnie. "Do you want to take a look at it?" "It's pretty," said Winnie, taking the little box and turning it over in her hands. The winding key was still revolving, but more and more slowly. The melody faltered. Another few widely spaced notes plinked, and then it stopped. "Wind it up if you want to," said May, clockwise. Winnie turned the key, and it clicked faintly. And then, after several more turns, the music began to play again, brisk from its fresh winding and merry. No one who owned a thing like this could be too disagreeable. Winnie examined the painted roses and lilies of the valley and smiled in spite of herself. "It's pretty," she repeated, handing it back to May. The music box had relaxed them all. Miles dragged a handkerchief from a back pocket and mopped at his face, and May sank down heavily on a rock, pulling off the blue straw hat and fanning herself with it. "Look here, Winnie Foster," said Jessie. "We're friends, we really are, but you got to help us. Come sit down, and we'll try to tell you why." Let's see how long the next chapter is. I could fit in some of it. Here we go. It was the strangest story Winnie had ever heard. She soon suspected they had never told it before, except to each other, and she was their first real audience, for they gathered around her like children at their mother's knee, each trying to claim her attention. And sometimes they all talked at once and interrupted each other in their eagerness. 87 years before, the Tucks had come from a long way to the east, looking for a place to settle. In those days, the woods was not a wood. It was a forest, just as her grandmother had said, a forest that went on and on and on. They had thought they would start a farm as soon as they came to the end of the trees, but the trees never seemed to end. When they came to a part that was now the wood and turned from the trail to find a camping place, they happened on the spring. It was real nice, said Jessie with a sigh. It looked just the way it does now. A clearing, lots of sunshine, that big tree with all those knobby roots. We stopped and everyone took a drink, even the horse. No, said May, the cat didn't drink. That's important. Yes, said Miles, don't leave that out. We all had a drink except for the cat. Well, anyway, Jessie went on, the water tasted sort of strange, but we camped there overnight, and Pa carved a T on the tree trunk to mark where we'd been. And then we went on. They had come out of the forest at last, many miles to the west, had found a thinly populated valley, and had started their farm. We put up a house for Ma and Pa, said Miles, and a little shack for Jessie and me. We figured we'd be starting our families of our own pretty soon, and would want our own houses. That was the first time we figured there was something peculiar, said May. Jessie fell out of a tree. I was way up in the middle, Jessie interrupted, trying to saw off some of the big branches before we cut her down. I lost my balance and I fell. I landed plumb on my head, said May with a shudder. We thought for sure he'd broke his neck, but come to find out, it didn't even hurt him a bit. Not long after, Miles went on, some hunters come by one day at sunset. The horse was out grazing by some trees, and they shot him. Mistook him for a deer, they said. Can you fancy that? But the thing is, they didn't kill him. The bullet went right on through him and didn't even leave a mark. Then Pa got snake bite, and Jessie ate the poisoned toadstools. And I cut myself, said May, remember, slicing bread. But it was the passage of time that worried them most. They had worked the farm, settled down, made friends, but after 10 years, then 20, they had to face the fact that there was something terribly wrong. None of them was getting any older. I was more than 40 by then, said Miles sadly. I was married, I had 2 children, but from the look of me, I was still 22. My wife, she finally made up her mind that I'd sold my soul to the devil. She left me and went away, and she took the children with her. I'm glad I never got married, Jessie put in. It was the same with our friends, said May. They come to pull back from us. There was talk about witchcraft and black magic. Well, you can't hardly blame them, but finally we had to leave the farm. We didn't know where to go. We started back the way we came, just wandering. We was like gypsies. When we got this far, it changed, of course. A lot of the trees was gone. There were people, and Tree Gap, it was a new village. The road was here, but in those days, it was mostly just a cow path. We went on into it, what was left of the wood, to make a camp. And when we got to the clearing and the tree and the spring, we remembered it from before. It hadn't changed no more than we had, said Miles. And that was how we found out. Pa's carved a T on the tree. Remember 20 years before? But the T was just where it'd been when he done it. The tree hadn't grown one whit in all that time. It was exactly the same. And the T he'd carved was as fresh as he had just put it there. Then they had remembered drinking the water. They and the horse, but not the cat. The cat had lived a long and happy life on the farm, but had died some 10 years before. So they decided at last that the source of their changelessness was the spring. What does she mean by the source of their changelessness? How have they not changed? Miles was in his 40s, but looked like he was 22. Jessie ate poisoned toadstools. Pa was bitten by a snake. The horse was shot. And nothing happened to any of them. How are they not changing? Remember I said the tagline on the front of this book says, "What if you could live forever?" What if you could live forever? what would it be like? I think this might be the changelessness they're talking about. Tune in tomorrow. It's a great story. Bye.